So, hello everyone. I'm Matthias Roth, and I'm going to present our study on gender differences and personality. We are revisiting gender differences because they have been studied for quite some time. This is joint work with Beatrice, Lena Römer, Anouk Saval, and also Clemens Lechner. So, there has been previous research on cross-national variation on gender differences and gender differences in general. And an initial finding is that women generally score higher than men on all personality domains, especially neuroticism and open-mindedness at around 0.5 standard deviations. But also within the domains there are specific facets which show larger gender differences than others. Now these studies were often conducted on pretty selective samples, so one question one could ask is whether those results also hold on a cross-national level. And here we have a mixed bag of evidence. Some studies find more negligible cross-national variations in gender difference, and some other studies find more systematic variations of gender differences across nations in personality. So this is a problem, of course, because for theory building, now any theory could be matched to this empirical results, depending on how you want to have your gender differences play out. So this study that we are conducting, and we are using the PIAAC cycle 2 data, of course, hopes to add to this conversation by building on the strong methodological foundations of the PIAAC cycle 2. First, we have, of course, the strong number of countries, like 27 countries. We have a centrally controlled translation procedure for the Big Five personality inventory. And we have the probabilistic sampling procedures. So we improve on the measurement side, but also on the representation side in comparison to previous studies. Of course, there are limitations, and I will go to these in the end. So we are, of course, going to need gender as a variable in our data set, and in the PIAAC cycle 2 data, gender is measured as a binary variable assigned by the interviewer, which is, not the super sophisticated gender measurement, but this is what we are working with here, and this is also what most of the previous studies have done as a binary variable. We are using the Big Five inventory there with the S and XS version, as Beatrice has introduced us to. The S version has 30 questions, 6 per domain and 2 per facet. So for this instrument, we can investigate facet level differences. The XS version has 15 questions or 15 items, 3 per domain, so we are only limited to domain differences. Then we are using the public use files of the PIAAC cycle 2, and here the personality variables are Z-standardized sum scores, so we cannot investigate absolute differences between countries, but we can compare relative differences in gender differences. We can compare relative gender differences between countries. And of course, we try to follow the advice given by the technical reports and all these documents, and we are using the main and replicate weights to obtain unbiased point and variance estimates. To make it clear what we are working with here, we are basically calculating gender differences in each of the countries. So we're calculating gender difference in terms of the standardized mean differences in Cohen's d, and we're also using the Mahler-Nobis distance. The Mahler-Nobis distance is a multivariate measure of difference between two groups, and this basically sums up the gender differences within a country. We then pool the estimates by treating the different country samples basically as single studies, and we pool them as in a meta-analysis, which has the nice advantage that we include the sampling variation in the pooled estimate via inverse variance weighting. So we're going to start to look at the gender differences on the pooled level, basically, and on the domain level. So here we are looking at gender differences using the BFI2XS, so the 15-item version, with 27 countries as our sample size. Now we can see that the biggest gender difference we see on neuroticism with a positive Cohen's d of 0.4, which means women score a 0.4 Cohen's d higher than men on neuroticism on average. Then we have agreeableness conscientiousness and openness, and then there is a very small gender difference of only 0.03 for extraversion, which is kind of a negligible gender difference or effect size. There is also the Mahalanobis distance of 0.67, which might not say much. So we can look at this at a disaggregated level. So we have the within country results now. On the x-axis, we see the countries ordered by their multivariate gender difference. This is the black line there. So on the left-hand side, we have the countries with the highest gender differences: Norway, Germany, Estonia, Belgium. And on the left-hand side, we have the countries with the lowest gender difference, so Israel and Singapore. The other squiggly lines are basically the gender differences of the domains. And we can see there is some variation there, so it depends on the country which domain has the largest gender difference there. Now we can also look at the facet-level results, and here something interesting happens. We have single facets which basically drive gender differences in certain domains. For example, sociability on extraversion, or anxiety, neuroticism, or aesthetic sensitivity in openness. These have much higher gender differences than the facets in the other facets within the domains. And if we disaggregate this again to the country level, the interesting thing is that these strong gender different facets are stable over the different countries. So we have single facets which are across all countries the facets with the highest gender difference. Now, what we also try to do is we try to look at country-level predictors of gender differences. So here we have, for example, GDP, HDI, which is the Human Development Index, life expectancy, gender inequality index, and individualism, and we correlated these with the country-level gender differences. We wanted to see whether a higher GDP, for example, or a high individualism score is correlated with more or less gender differences. And we find two interesting rows and columns here. One is the gender difference for openness, where we see that GDP, HDI, and individualism, and also life expectancy, are negatively correlated with openness gender differences, which means the higher the individualism score, the higher the GDP, the HDI, the smaller the gender differences become on the openness domain. Conversely, if we look at this column with the individualism correlations, we see that extraversion gender differences and openness gender differences are positively correlated with individualism. So here we have like also a mixed bag, basically, of evidence, because there are some theories, or there is the idea that if countries become more, developed in the sense of GDP or gender equality or individualism, the gender differences basically become bigger because the genders can express themselves more freely. But here we can see this depends on the domain, and basically we have to look closer in future studies. Now, I'm a little bit faster than I expected, but the discussion is that we still find that women score higher than men on average on self-reported neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, openness, but we don't find a strong effect size for extraversion. Countries then clearly differed in the magnitude of the gender differences found, so we need to look closer in the single countries if we want to explain them. Within the domains, often a single facet drives gender difference. This is the result for 11 countries. So here we basically would need more countries to make this a more robust result, but at least for those 11 countries, the facets with the largest gender differences are indeed found on all countries. And then country indicators are inconsistently related to gender differences. So here we also need to look at the specific indicator, but also at the specific domain, whether they are positively or negatively correlated. Now, with regards to the limitations, the country sample is still pretty weird. So Western educated industrialized, rich, and democratic. So we're missing out a huge chunk of countries that are very different from the OECD countries. I mean, we have the countries in Asia, Africa, South America, Central America, all these different countries which have very different circumstances and probably could also have very different results with regards to the country level indicators. Then, of course, self-reports can be biased. Cultural norms and gender expectations or social desirable responding can be very different across the countries. And for example, more gender-equal countries can also lead to, or being in a more gender-equal country could also lead to reference group effects. So you basically judge certain domain values or domain questions and facets differently depending on which country you are in. Then we have the issue of measurement invariance, which we cannot really resolve right now because we don't have item-level information in the public use files. So we have to wait until we can access all the scientific use files to really make sure that measurement invariance is met or where it is not met. And we also have the issue of differential scale reliability, which we will need to have a look at because I think they are now available also in the technical report if you're interested in that. All right, so this is the first presentation.
Thank you, Matthias. We have time for questions. Oh yeah, Brent, please.
Is there any data in the data set that would give you some other alternative hypotheses for the gender differences, such as gender distributions in jobs and things of that sort that you could use to investigate why some places are larger than others?
So I think, I mean, gender differences on different variables, like that, of course, PIAAC has a lot of data on occupation, which could be interesting to do like a follow-up to see if gender differences in the country are larger, are they also apparent in other variables, and does this correlate? So I think this would also be a nice add-on to that question. Yeah? I mean, income and stuff like that is also, of course, in the PIAAC data set. But yeah, for now we are just doing more of a descriptive analysis.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering that you used neuroticism, the concept, instead of, I think, emotional stability.
Sorry, what was the last?
The concept of neuroticism, yeah? Subdimensions.
Yeah.
Instead of emotional stability?
Yeah, we just...
Why did you use these
we used it, I think, because the previous studies used neuroticism, but it's just the inverted emotional stability scale. So it's nothing, it's fancy. Yeah.
Thank you, first of all. I also have more of a general question. Hello. In economics, a lot of people also talk about non-cognitive skills when referring to the big five. Did you discuss that, how you phrase it, like personality traits versus non-cognitive skills? I also like the personality traits more. I'm just curious whether you discussed that.
So yeah, I think so. The paper that is being drafted is basically using more of the non-cognitive skills vocabulary, but it has changed over time. Let's say it like that. I think in the OECD or like the OECD reports and the data sets, the non-cognitive skill vocabulary is used, but I think the difference depends a little bit on the discipline you are in, and I think. Do you want to say something to that? I think.
Should I add on that? Yeah. We were just discussing it over lunch. As I mentioned in our introduction, we were aiming, or the OECD, the BBC was aiming to assess non-cognitive skills, or how they frame it, social-emotional skills, which is a bit more positive term, as part of PIAAC, and we tested which are the most relevant social-emotional skills for the outcomes assessed in PIAAC, like economic outcomes, educational outcomes, life satisfaction, health outcomes, or cognitive skills. And of all the, I don't know, 30-something constructs that we tested, the only ones relevant were the big five. Yeah? And so this is what we subsumed as the most relevant socio-emotional / non-cognitive skills for this context. And this is why we use it here regarding the term more or less equivalent, because this is our interpretation of the relevant socio-emotional skills in the context of PIAAC.
All right, thanks.
Thanks. Okay, thank you once again, Matthias.